to Personalizing Mailing Content. I'm Shannon Turner. Let's get started. For our agenda today, we're going to cover what is a snippet and what is conditional content. We're going to go over the jargon and analyze how those work. We're going to cover a bunch of practical examples and then figure out how to include data from reports and spreadsheet. We're going to round it out with what snippets, tags, and filters you can use. First off, what is a snippet? So I want to quickly explain some of the terms that we're going to be using a lot in this training so that we have a shared vocabulary and we can be sure that we're all referring to the same things, especially since this is programming. And in programming, the syntax really matters. So first, highlighted here in 1, this is going to tell ActionKit we want to insert a value here. Number 2 is the value or variable. You'll hear those interchangeably. The value or variable that we're inserting. And number 3 with the curly braces says that we are done with this value. Let's move on to something else. Filters are going to allow you to make changes to your values. So this filter, title, is going to change the value of everything to the left of this pipe. And all filters work the same way. They make a change to the value that's to the left of the pipe, but each filter is going to do something different. So this filter, title, is going to make something title cased, also known as capitalizing the first letter. So some filters also need an argument. So here we have the default filter, which checks to see if the value of what's to the left of the pipe, if this value is empty or none, then we are going to provide a default. Now, what's the default that we provide? Well, that's where number 2 comes in, and this is the argument or parameter that sets the default value. You can also combine multiple filters or chain them together. There's not a limit to how many filters that you can use, but there are a limit to how many would look nice on a slide. So here I just have these 2. If my value at step 1 is Shannon, then the default filter doesn't do anything because this value isn't blank, and so my value is still Shannon. Title casing it doesn't change anything either because it was already in title case. Let's take another example. Let's say I typed my name in all lowercase when I signed my petition. At step 2, nothing's changed because there is a value for it, so the default doesn't do anything. But at step 3, it does get raised to title case. But let's say my first name is blank. That's when the default kicks in, and the value is now lowercase friend. At step 3, we apply the title casing, and the F in friend becomes uppercase. Now you might be thinking, couldn't you just have an uppercase friend in this default at step 2? Absolutely, you could, but I wanted to demonstrate how these filters work together. So if you see them later on, you'll understand. So to recap, we call all of this collectively a value. You might also hear the word parameter or argument. Those are interchangeable. So here we have our value, we have our filter, we have the argument or parameter. They mean the same thing. And then this here is a tag. Values like these first 2, they always insert some text, but a tag can do lots of different things. Every single tag is different, but a tag is going to do something. Sometimes that's adding in text. Other times it's making some kind of change or doing some conditional content, and we'll get to conditional content in a few slides. But collectively, ActionKit refers to all of these as snippets. And we're really only scratching the surface here. There's a ton more nuance and detail and jargon, but I think this foundation is good enough to follow along with the rest of the presentation. So to recap, we have our snippet here. There are a ton more snippets that are available in the snippets menu, and you can click here to see a bunch of them that are available for you to use. This second link goes to the database reference on users, and any column in the user table could also be used as a snippet. But you can also reference fields that are related to the user. For instance, a user's custom fields, and so much more. This is just a small portion of the database reference page for what data we store in the user table. There's a lot of technical information in here, but really the field is very useful. It can be helpful to know what's available. The snippets menu that's attached to all of your text editors will show you a lot of snippets that you can use. And you might have noticed that the snippets that are available on the pages screens or the after actions screen looks very different from what's available on the mailings tab. That's on purpose because there's different snippets available to you at different times. For instance, if someone has just taken an action, well, we know what that action is that they just took on the after action, info screen, right? The thank you page. We don't have that if someone hasn't taken action yet, right? If we're just showing the page that they're going to take action on, right? So we don't show you everything that's possible here either. Showing a full list would be a lot to scroll through, and this would also make the menu a lot less useful. But we show you the most common snippets, and if you learn what's available, you can type them yourself. So next I want to walk through how you can go about adding conditional content. This is one of the most common and powerful ways of personalizing your mailing content, so it's really worth understanding how this works. We're going to start with an easy example, and we're going to add some complexity each time. So we're already familiar with this first option for adding a user's name with a snippet. This second bullet point is roughly equivalent, but it's definitely a bit more verbose. So let's read this as, if the user's first name is not blank, let's show their first name. But if their first name is blank, we don't show anything at all in this case. We're not going to show anything here, but you will get a stray comma, right? So I think this second bullet point is a little bit better, because if we don't know the user's first name, we don't display just a blank with a stray comma. Let's add in the default now, and this is the first name snippet that you'll get from the snippets menu. So if the user doesn't have a first name, we default to friend. That way we never have that stray comma problem. Now, this second bullet point is roughly equivalent, but again, it's a bit more verbose. So let's read this as, if the user's first name isn't blank, let's show their first name. Else, or otherwise, let's display friend. The if, and all of this is case sensitive, this starts the conditional, and the end if ends the conditional. I want to really emphasize here that the syntax is very, very precise. So here, the condition is, does user.firstname have some value? Is there something in that variable? And if there is, then we display everything that becomes between this if tag and this end if tag. In this example, that's displaying the user's first name. Now let's break down this else. This else is the catch-all for everything else not covered by this if statement. This else has to come between the if and the end if, and it comes with its own set of content. And if you were paying super close attention on the last slide, you might have noticed that I mentioned multiple conditions. The way you do that is with the elif tag, which is used very similarly to if. So let's read this as, is the user in District Virginia 11? If so, I want to display this content. If not, or elif, are they in Arizona 7? If so, display this content. Otherwise, let's display this catch-all content. So, like if statements, an elif also requires some condition. In this example, this is this user's district equal to Arizona 7? Notice that the else does not take a condition, and that's because it's meant to be the catch-all. I also want to point out that the way that we test for equals might be different than what you're used to. Here we have two equal signs to ask, are these two things equal? Two equal signs to ask, are these two things equal? So to recap, a conditional starts with an if tag and you need a condition. Like for instance, is user.firstname or is user's location in Virginia 11? You might have one or more elif tags, and if you do, each of them needs a condition. You might have an else tag, but you always end with an endif tag. And you could even nest these. Now, this last point means that you could have if statements within if statements. This is a bit more rare, it's a bit more complex. I don't think it would translate neatly to on the slides. I don't think it would look very nice, so I'm not showing it here, but you might see it in some of your own mailings, especially if you have more complex conditionals that you're testing for. Now that we understand the syntax and the structure, I want to cover a bunch of practical examples from questions that we've commonly gotten into support and things that I see commonly come up in trainings. So here we have a list of a bunch of toss-up districts. And our goal here is to display content based on which congressional district a user is in for users in one of these 9 key toss-up districts. Now, you could set it up this way. If user.location.us district is equal to Arizona 1, then display this content. Elif, or otherwise, is the user in Arizona 6, then display this content. Well, if they're not in those two, are they in Colorado 8? If so, display this content. On and on and on and on and on. And then we have some otherwise, some catch-all for these are critical toss-up races. There's a lot of repetitive content here, and maybe in an actual mailing, you'd have unique and specialized content for each of these districts. Maybe not. Maybe these would be separate mailings, or more likely, you'd be mailing about these districts as like a general group of toss-up districts. But before we move on to a better way of doing this, let's look at the preview for this content. In this example, I found a user who I know is in Arizona 01, that district, and I've entered in their email address in the highlighted box here, and I've clicked update. And then it shows me the race in your district, Arizona 1, is a toss-up. If you don't know a user that matches the criteria that you're looking for, don't worry, because you can use the advanced search from the users tab to find them. So here I find the US legislative district, and then I can filter by the districts that I want. And you could do this for states also. This doesn't have to be for US House District. So here I'm saying, is my user in one of these states? Notice that the syntax here is a little bit different than before. Rather than checking for whether the user's location is equal to something, we're checking for whether it's in this text. This is also how I do it for the US district example previously as well. So if user.location.us district is in Arizona 01, Arizona 06, Colorado 8, and so on, then the race in your state or the race in your district is a toss-up. Otherwise, These are some critical toss-up races. Now, I want to make a mistake on purpose because it's really easy to make mistakes on accident later on when you're not in, looking at this training. And this can be really helpful to recognize problems and be able to fix them. So here in this example, I've highlighted here that I forgot to change this equal sign to in. So I'm still checking, is this user's location, US district, is this district equal to Arizona 01, Arizona 06, Colorado 8? That's not going to be true for anybody, right? Because that's not how we store the data, right? You only have one district. So I've added in this else, this catch-all, I've added what the district is, and that can help me identify this mistake, right? So here I have, when I preview, I'm previewing for the Shannon that's in Arizona 01. And here it tells me there are critical toss-up races. Your district is Arizona 01. So I don't expect to get this catch-all when I preview. So there must be something wrong. And then when I look more closely, oh, that's because I forgot to change these equal signs to in. So this is also why it's really important to test with lots of users, and especially users where you know what the expected values should be. So let's take a look at another example. So for this one, we want to display content based on which tags a user has or which user groups a user is in. In this example, this user has the Green New Deal tag and has also signed at least one petition. You can customize your mailings based on a user's tags that they have. So in this example, if this user is tagged with Green New Deal, then we're going to show the content. We know you care a lot about the climate. Now, it's already a good idea to segment your mailings, targeting your mailings based on a user's interest, and this can also help you target your content based on a user's interest. So here's an example that shows checking for a series of user groups. So for instance, if a user is in the user group of people who have made a phone call, can you call your senator? Otherwise, if they haven't made a phone call, are they in the donors group? And we can ask them to make a donation. Otherwise, have they signed a petition? If so, then we can ask them to sign a petition. One more thing that I want to introduce is that you can have a more complex condition that you're checking for. This works with any condition and not just with tags and user groups. So here in this example, we're checking for whether a user has the Green New Deal tag or the climate tag. Either one or both will work, and we will show this content. We know you care a lot about the climate in that case. You can also require both or all of the conditions to be true. So in this example, we're checking whether a user has the Green New Deal tag and is in the petition signers user group. The user has to have both or they won't see this text. Example number 3. Let's take a look at donations by year and display content based on a donor's recent donation history. So here I have my user's donation history screen, which I find really useful to reference when I'm creating snippets that are based on a user's donation history. So here I have if user.stats.donationsbyyear.2024 is greater than or equal to 100, then I know that this user made at least $100 in donations in that year. And so here I'm going to show how many. Here I have an elif. So elif not user.stats.donationsbyyear2024. Then I know that the user didn't make any donations at all in that year. And then the else is the catch-all. This is the user made some donations, but they made fewer than $100 total, and then display that many. There's a lot of different ways that you could handle this. You could have different thresholds. You could, structure it differently, but you get the idea of you can have lots of different ways to check for the donations that a user has made in a given period. And when we preview, this user made at least $100 in donations in calendar year 2024, and they made $133. There's also an option in the snippets menu to get the year-to-date total donations made by this user. But if you use that snippet for a user who hasn't yet given this year, you're going to see this message. So this says, you must correct the following errors before previewing. You're using requires value, donations.year-to-date, but this user doesn't have a value for donations.year-to-date. That means that this user, you can't preview this mailing for that user, and any user who doesn't have that value, like this one, you can't preview for them, they're not going to receive this email, even if they match your targeting otherwise. So this is one way that you can control who receives this mailing from the content screen, in addition to on your targeting. But if you do want everyone in your targeting set to get this email, you can remove the requires value tag, and then instead of saying requires value, donations.year-to-date, I'm just showing the donations.years-to-date snippet. So when I preview, it says this year you've given $0. That works, but I think we can make this look better. If we change this to if donations.year-to-date, then if someone's made a donation this year, it will show this year you've given this much. Otherwise, it'll say, can you make your first donation this year? And I think this looks a lot better than this year you've given $0. We have a bunch of similar snippets in the snippets menu that you can use, like getting the amount or the date of a user's most recent donation. And we also break these out by one-time and recurring donations as well. You can get the highest previous donation, you can get the average donation. There's really so much that you can do here. So number 4 is suggested asks. I want to show different ask amounts based on a user's recent donation history. So here in this first example, can you make another donation of donations.highestprevious? And if we look back at the donation history for this user, we see that their highest donation that they've made was $27. We can also use a filter to multiply that amount. Can you make a donation of donations.highestprevious and then multiply that by 1.25? That'll give us $33.75, which that's fine, but I think we can make that look nicer if we apply the float format filter with 0. Float format will say, how many decimal places do we want? We want 0 decimal places. Now we're getting a donation of $34 instead. Most commonly, we see buttons set up something like this: donate 14, donate 27, donate 20, and so on. For the sake of not having too much clutter on the next few slides, I'm only going to show the amounts. I'm not going to show the word donate. I'm not going to show the HTML code for this button. I just want to focus on the personalization rather than those other details. So here's one way that you could set these kind of buttons up. Here I'm using donations.highestprevious, and if the user has not made a donation before, let's default to $5 so that we're showing something to ask for instead of 0, right? And then let's multiply by different amounts from half as much all the way up to double. And then for all of these, let's round to the nearest dollar so it looks nicer on these buttons. And then the result that we get is going to be from 14 to 27 to 54. Now, we can reuse these variables using with. And this lets you create a variable and use them as snippets. And I'm going to show the syntax in just a minute. But you're going to use this most commonly as a shortcut to help save you a bit of time in typing when you have a snippet that you're using over and over and over again. Like in the previous example, we used donations.highestprevious 6 different times, right? So here's how you'd actually use the with tag. First, we have the syntax that says with, and then what do we want to store as a variable? We want donations.highestprevious. We want to store that as the variable HPC, or highest previous contribution. So now I don't need to say donations.highestprevious every time. Instead, I can just say HPC. That's the name of my variable. So here I say HPC, I apply the default filter, I apply the multiply filter, I apply the float format filter, just like I was with donations.highestprevious before. And then finally, the end with is required. This says we're done with this variable, we don't need it anymore, and I want to include that end with at the very, very end. So this is how you'd actually set this up. So basically every place where I had donations.highestprevious, now I'm just going to say HPC. And then I have to sandwich all of these snippets in between the with tag and this end with tag. And since you're applying the default 5 filter to everything, you can see here it's going on all of these, we can actually move that up to the with tag, which makes the rest of these snippets a bit shorter. Notice that the results are always the same here. So here's another syntax of the tag that's also valid. You might also see this. So instead of with donations.highestprevious as HPC, this says with HPC equal to donations.highestprevious. They do exactly the same thing. And if you want to learn some more tips and tricks for snippets and suggested ask formulas, including how to round to the nearest $5 or $10, check out this video and this blog post. I'll include links to these in the description. So example number 5, let's show a user's date of their most recent donation, but in a different format. So here I'm using the donations.mostRecentDate snippet to show us the date of the user's most recent donation if they've made a donation. And that's what this if donations.highestprevious snippet does. If they've made a donation, then they're going to have something for highest previous. Otherwise, they won't, and so this won't appear. So when we preview, it shows the format year, month, date. And while I personally love this format, I think it's really unambiguous and looks really nice, I suppose it's not for everybody. So let's take a look at how we can change it. By default, most dates in the snippets will give you this format. But using the date filter, you can use whatever format that you like. And I'm going to include the link here in the description so you can get all of that. Now there's a ton of different options that you can use for the date argument, but common ones that you might find useful include F, J, Y, and don't worry about memorizing these. I don't memorize them either. I look them up every time. These are all case sensitive, but these are the codes that reference things like, okay, August 24, 2024, or maybe I want to show it 8/24/2024, all of that. So here's how we would apply this. We would use the date filter on most recent date and include the argument that you want. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't work right away. And the reason for that isn't very intuitive, but behind the scenes, donations.mostRecentDate isn't actually stored as a date. It's actually just text. And so the system that ActionKit is built on doesn't realize that this should be formatted as a date, and so we need an extra step. This is where the load date time filter comes in. Load date time says, take this text, which is donations.mostRecentDate, load it into the system as a date. And currently the text is in this format: year, month, date. I know it looks like a date to me, I know it looks like a date to you, but the computer doesn't realize it, so it needs a little hand holding. And then once we've gotten that done, then we can apply the date filter using the argument that we want. And then we get, thanks for your generous donation on August 24, 2024. So this might be a little confusing and tricky. Don't worry, don't feel bad. This does come up often enough that I wanted to show you how to get around this problem. And if you click on this link, which I will make available in the description, you might notice that all of the letter codes for load date time are different than those for date. So that's fun. Definitely confusing. So don't worry about memorizing them. You have the links. So we could spend lots more time covering practical examples, but let's move on to merge queries and merge files. This will let us include data from our reports and spreadsheets. So we've seen lots of examples of using snippets to personalize content, but all of these examples have come from data that's already within ActionKit. And sometimes wouldn't it be nice to pull data from a spreadsheet and include it in your mailings? So back in 2017, when I was on the client side, we did a major push telling senators not to repeal Obamacare. And part of that campaign was by saying, if you do, you'll be taking away the insurance from this many people who had gained their health insurance through Medicaid expansion. We also got really specific and targeted vulnerable House members, and we drove phone calls and office visits to remind them how many people in their district would be thrown off of their insurance. So that was really powerful as a tactic. It worked really well. And that question and similar questions are unfortunately relevant again today. So if you can come up with some type of question like this, those questions have answers that you could figure out. And those answers you can put into a spreadsheet. And then you can upload that spreadsheet into ActionKit and use it to personalize your mailings. So here's an example spreadsheet of how many people don't have health insurance in each state. If I download that as a comma-separated values file, I can then upload it into ActionKit. So here I upload it into ActionKit, and this says to upload a comma or tab delimited file to merge into your mailing, matching targeted users on the first field. So what this means is that we're going to determine who meets these criteria based on the first or leftmost column. In this case, that's the state abbreviation. So you could do what state they are, what district they are. If you wanted, you could also match on other details as well, as long as you have there something to match on that user. Now that we've loaded our merge file and everything looks good, let's add it to our mailing. On the compose screen of the mailing, if you click on merge file in the basics section, then you can choose your merge file. Now that I've attached my merge file to my mailing, I can use the snippets from the snippets menu. The snippets names will be merge and then a dot, and then the column name from your spreadsheet. And in this example, I added the comma-fi filter, and this will add a comma in the thousands place on the uninsured number. Merge queries are very similar to merge files, but instead of using data from a spreadsheet, you can include any data that you can write a report for. Now, just like with merge files, you'll need to match to your users. In our merge file example, we matched to users based on which state they live in. Merge queries and merge files have the same requirements and options here. So you could do, what is their state, what is their district, what is their zip code. With merge queries, it's a little more common to match on a user's user ID as well, so it's matched specifically to that user. So merge queries are just like any other report, but they have a few requirements. That first column must match to users. Like before, like I said before, you could match on that user's ID, and it would be personalized just to that specific user. Or you could do it a little more generally for zip code or house district or state. With merge queries, that's a little less common. You have to use the report category merge. This is what tells ActionKit that you want to use this in your mailing to personalize it. And you have to name all of your columns. So here I have a merge query, which I'm building in the query builder. I'm using a users query type, and I've given it the name lifetime donation amounts and a nice little description so that I know what this is all about. So for my column, I'm going to match on users by the user ID, so every user gets their own personalized content. Then I'm going to show the sum of payments for that user. For my filter criteria, I want to include everyone who's made at least one donation. And then in order to use this in my mailing, I need to use the merge category. Be sure to save and then get your results. Make sure that the results of your report look correct before you move on, of course. If the results don't make sense, then it's not going to look good in your mailing either. Now, in order to actually add this merge query to your mailing, we'll follow the same process as we did with the merge file. On the compose screen of your mailing, you'll click Add a merge query, and then choose which one you want from the drop-down menu. If you don't see your merge query, then either your merge query doesn't have the report category of merge, so you'll need to add that to your report and save it, or you might have had your compose screen open before you created your merge query report. Maybe you created it in a separate tab after the fact. In either way, just refresh the compose screen and then you'll see your merge query. So now we can see the merge queries snippets in our mailing content. Just go down to the snippets menu. When we get to preview, we see something a little strange. It says the literal text you've given payment amount in all capital letters. Now, the preview pane does actually hint at this, and it tells us to expect it, but it's very easy to overlook this. So I've highlighted it here. It says this layout preview features placeholder information that may be out of date or simulated. So to view the layout with accurate data, send a proof. So what this means is in order to actually see the value we expect, we either need to send ourselves a proof or we can build our targeting. So I'm going to build our targeting. On the targeting screen of our mailing, I'm going to save and move on to there. in almost every case, you'll want to use your usual targeting in addition to this special criteria, merge query, merge file targeting. You'll still do your includes and excludes as usual. You'll just also do these merge query and merge file. So let's take a look at your options for targeting with this special criteria. In this example, my mailing has both a merge file and a merge query. If I check this box, then users who do not get matched by my merge file will not receive this mailing. If I check this box for merge query, if my user is not matched by the merge query, which if we remember had a filter criteria to only give me donors. So if someone isn't matched by this report, then they will not be receiving this mailing. And here in this case, if a user isn't matched by both, they won't receive the mailing. So it probably isn't too common to have both a merge file and a merge query in your mailing, but I did want to show it just as an example. But generally speaking, if you have a special criteria box for your merge files or queries, you almost always want to check the box and you want to use your normal targeting as well. So now we've saved our targeting, we return to the compose screen, we preview, and now we see the correct amount as we expect. So merge queries are really powerful and they allow you to bring in data from the database to use in your mailings. Now, if you only want this data for a single mailing because it's just a one-off, you're never going to do this again, that's fine. But if you might need this data again, or if it's useful to personalize your pages also, or if you'd like to keep it up to date on the user overview screen, you might want to use a custom user field instead. So I have a whole training on custom user fields, tags, and user groups. You should definitely check that out. And it discusses at length how to set up custom user fields and to get data into them. So that will be linked in the description here as well. As powerful as merge queries are, I really like custom user fields because they're always available, even for my pages, with no merge query necessary. So for instance, you could do this kind of conditional content with a custom user field. So if user.customfields.donationslifetime, if they've given more than $1,000, then can you give highest previous contribution, multiply that by 3, float format 0. You could do this same thing with a merge query also. Either way, it's really up to you. You have a lot of different options for how you do it. So here we're asking if they've given a lot of money, we want to multiply the highest previous contribution ask by 3. Otherwise, we'll give the highest previous contribution multiplied by 2. For this user who is not given more than 1,000, we are going to ask for 54. We know that this user, their maximum that they had given previously was 27, so this is the right number. This user, on the other hand, they gave $1,000 at once, and their donations lifetime, their max is 1,100, so we are going to show the multiple of 3 here. So using custom user fields can be a lot fewer steps, or maybe it's just moving all of the work up front and doing it once. But either way, I really like using custom user fields, especially if you're going to use these sorts of conditional content or snippets on your pages. Maybe it's not worth doing if you're just using the data once and then never again. In that case, a merge query is fine. But if you're using it a lot, or if you're using it on your pages, you might want it as a custom user field. Next up, I want to give a broad overview of the main categories of snippets that you can use in your mailings. So I reference these links all the time. These are some of my most used bookmarks in my browser, and I'll of course include these in the description for you. The first links to the snippets overview, which shows all of the different types of snippets that are available in your mailings. ActionKit is built using Django, and the reason that I mention that is because this second link goes to a Django documentation page that goes in depth on all of the tags and filters that come standard with Django. So things like if, elif, else, and with, things like that. And then the third link is our documentation on our custom tags and filters added into ActionKit. But the real magic comes in how these individual building blocks get combined together in your mailings. So here are links for the main user snippets that you can use. You might have seen this slide before. This covers a user's personal details like their name and location, what groups they're in, and so on. But I think being able to pull in a user's custom fields is also really powerful as well. So if I know a user is an ActBlue Express Lane user, when I'm sending them a fundraising link, I can send them an ActBlue link. Otherwise, I can send them an ActionKit donation page. And if you've already written content for your mailings landing page, then you can reuse that content like the statement lead-in and the about text for petitions, the ground rules for events, ask text for donations, and so on. We make all of those snippets available. Just make sure you connect your landing page to your mailing. We've also seen a bunch of these donation snippets already, but here they are again. You can get data about your user's donation history in a bunch of different ways. So things like what's their one-time donations or their recurring donations, what's their highest donations or their averages, what's their most recent donations, what amounts have they given, when did they give, and so on. For events, you can include all of the information that a user might want to know about an event that you're trying to recruit them to attend or to host. So this could be when it is, when it starts, what they should know before attending, all of that. And this one I used all the time when I was a client. So we'd ask our supporters to call their representative or to sign a petition. And we wanted to include those details in the email itself, like what the user's target is, what the phone number is to call, all of that. Now you need to set up a landing page that uses targets, for instance, like a call page or a petition page or a letter page. And yes, you can have multiple targets, like US House and US Senate. You can even make custom snippets that will be added to the snippets menu. So here is some of the HTML necessary to make some of these fundraising buttons that we saw on a previous slide. And I think this is really helpful because then it appears in your snippets menu. So you can set up a handful of snippets that you use all the time, set those up in advance, make sure that they work exactly the way you want them to, and then you don't have to mess with them later on. After you click, it adds in the buttons just like that. And I love this because for some things like fundraising buttons, it can be really difficult to set up. It can be easy to make mistakes. But once you set it up in the snippets menu, then you really don't have to worry as much because once you've gotten it perfectly, you can just click and leave it alone. But always make sure you get a preview. Make sure everything works and looks exactly the way you want it to. So, what tags and filters can you use? Let's take a look. These are a handful of the built-in Django filters that I use most often and that I see clients use really frequently as well. I'm only including the ones that are most important for mailings rather than ones that are useful for other things like pages or reports. After all, this is the Personalizing mailing content training. So even though these aren't underlined, that's only because it's easier to read. All of these are links that go to the documentation pages, and all of these I will link in the description. Now, date lets you reformat a date. We saw that earlier. Default checks for if this value is blank, then show something else instead. Float format lets you choose how many decimal places to show. Length says how long is this list of items. Pluralize can pluralize a list if necessary, which is really helpful if you have one or more targets. Slice lets you get a part of a list of items. You might have seen this if you're showing a handful of nearby events. Time is similar to date because it lets you reformat a time. Time since and time until lets you say, oh, this event is going to be 2 days from now, or thanks for coming to this event 2 days ago. And then title lets you capitalize the first letter of your text. Here are a handful of custom ActionKit filters that I use most often and I see clients use frequently as well. So these are all also linked to the documentation. I'll include the links in the description. So we saw a lot of these in the practical examples earlier, but here's all of them. The at least filter lets you set a minimum number. So if I want to ask for at least $5, I can do that. Comify lets you show a thousands separator. Date add lets you add dates together to create a future date. In group is used to ask, is this user in this group? Load date time we saw turns text into a date. Multiply allows us to multiply two numbers together. Login string, I really love this one. It lets users log in to their user management page without a password. So this lets them, manage their recurring donation or update their credit card without using a password. Number lets you turn text into a number. Percent of lets you come up with what is the percentage of this smaller number of this bigger one. Replace character lets you replace one character with another. Tagged asks, does this user have a specific tag? And then tag links lets you add URL parameters to a URL. There's really only 4 main built-in Django tags that you need for mailings. And some of these, like if, elif, else, endif, and with, you've seen before. But the others, like filter, lets you apply a filter to a whole section of text. For lets you do something for every item in a list. So this is common with for each event that matches or for each target in a user's, senators or House representative. And then for custom ActionKit tags, I think that these 3 are the most important. So remember and store are very similar to with, and they let you have 2 additional ways of creating variables. And we saw requires value previously, which says if this user doesn't have this value, they can't get this mailing, they can't preview this mailing. So this is bonus content. So this is advanced stuff. What snippets can you use? You can see even more here. So we've seen user.firstname, but what's user just on its own? And here we can see there's a lot of code in here. Again, this is advanced, but if you add the user snippet to the mailing body and you preview, then you're going to see all of the different things that are available. This isn't the most readable, but you get the sense of what's possible to use. We can make this a little bit more readable by looping over every option. So for attribute in user, let's show all of the attributes. We end this with end4, and then we see all of the different fields that are available. So many of these are going to match what you would see in the database reference, but there's also some things in here too, like custom fields and phones. Don't worry about things like password appearing in this list. We do not store the user's password in plain text. You cannot view a user's password. This just shows you all of the fields that are available in the database, plus some other related objects like the custom fields and the phones. So in other words, what's available to you as a snippet? All of this, right? And so if we take one of those fields, let's say custom fields, let's see what this user has. I'm going to use this snippet in the body, user.customFields. So here in the preview pane, I can get a preview for a random user, but I like to specify a specific user that I want to look at. You can either use an email or a user ID. And so here, this is what this user has for their custom fields. And when you're testing that your snippets work, I find that it's really helpful to get a user that I know the values for. So maybe you have a test user in your ActionKit that you can use for this, but here on the user overview screen, I've looked up my record. And if I scroll down, I can see that my custom user fields match what we saw on the previous slide a few slides ago. So this is especially helpful when we get into more complicated examples. I really recommend keeping a list of users that you can test with and having a mix of users like donors and non-donors, basically all of the categories of things that you're looking for and testing and using in your mailings. All of that's really helpful, especially with conditional content. So we're never going to include all of the user's custom fields in a mailing though. That would look really awkward. This can be helpful when we're drafting the mailing, but for actual conditional content, we want to use the user.customfields. Whatever that field is, right? So in this case, let's do employer, and then here we can see that my employer is ActionKit. So I wanted to show you this though, because you don't need to memorize it. You don't need to rely on the snippets menu. And while this is an easy example, this same principle is true for lots of snippets. So here we have user.location.asDict. Dict stands for dictionary. So just user.location by itself is empty, but we know that's not right. Some objects, like user.location, can be viewed in greater detail by using .asDict for as dictionary. So here we get the user's house district with US district. So here, user.location.us district. You don't have to memorize all of this. This is how you can look it up. I know all of this was advanced, so don't worry about all of that, but this can be useful stuff. So thank you all so much. Here's where you can get the slides. I'll also include the links to everything in the description. Make sure you check out the other trainings from ClientCon 2025. Thanks, everyone.